Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to class and to the essay that we were discussing in the last class, and that is titled The Old and the New Schoolmaster. I told you at the conclusion of the previous lecture that this is an essay that we are going to continue, and the place where we had left off was where this gentleman, this fellow traveler of Ilias, gets off the coach, and as he is descending from the coach, he throws out a question and a piece of information to the passengers who are sitting outside the protected area of the coach, and to whom Ilia refers as being outside passengers. So having discussed various questions that this fellow traveler puts to Ilia, we are going to move on to what Ilia thought of his fellow traveler and all the thoughts and ideas that came to his mind and which made him think of the lot of schoolmasters in general, and particularly those who were a part of the British school system during the lifetime of Charles Lamb. The British schools are an institution in themselves, and being renowned for her system of education, England has always been foremost amongst the Western systems that have been emulated. And one of the portions, or one of the sections of this system, is the school system. And you need to remember particularly that Charles Lamb, writing under the name of Ilia, is talking about the school system as it applies to boys, and more particularly the boarding schools, the schools where schoolboys went, and they lived there until vacation time, when they would go back home. So Ilia concludes, by the time his fellow passenger gets off the stagecoach, that he was a schoolmaster, and he asked these questions, and he tried to involve Ilia into discussions, not because he was interested in what Ilia knew, but because he wanted to impress Ilia with his knowledge, and at the same time brush up on what he knew. So it was kind of like a practice session, and the fact that he was trying to impress Ilia with his knowledge might have made Ilia think that he was a clergyman, because he is so knowledgeable. But as he says, he was wearing a greenish colored coat, and you know that members of the clergy went about wearing either white or gray or black, and they did not wear green. And then he was wearing a kind of a coat, so that also sort of did away with any ideas that he might have had that his fellow passenger was a clergyman. So he says that this adventure, as Ilia calls it, he says, gave birth to some reflections on the difference between persons of his profession in past and present times. So Lamb is going to go into the past and compare the schoolmasters of, let's say, the 16th and 17th centuries with the schoolmasters of the 18th century. Rest to the souls of those fine old pedagogues, the breed long since extinct of the Lilies and the Linacres, who, believing that all language contained learning, and despising every other acquirement as superficial and useless, came to their task as to a sport. So he's thinking back of schoolmasters in the past, and he says that the schoolmasters of the past thought that all that there was to know in this world was contained in the languages. So what he's referring to is the study of Latin and Greek, which two languages were compulsory in the past. But because Lamb is writing about the 18th century, what he's referring to is the fact that no more are Latin and Greek compulsory, and it's not only that they are not compulsory, but the fact that the teachers who are teaching right now are not the same as those who taught in the past. And he takes two names of very famous teachers, that is Lilly and Linacre. So he says that those teachers, and I'm going to refer to the teachers in the past as those teachers, and teachers in the present, that is the 18th century, as these teachers. So those schoolmasters and these schoolmasters, that's how we're going to refer to them for the purposes of this lecture. So he says those schoolmasters approached learning and teaching as a sport. So they indulged in it with all their energy, all their effort, and the sole purpose was conveying and communication of knowledge or transference of knowledge from the schoolmasters to the students. Passing from infancy to age, they dreamed away all their days as in a grammar school, revolving in a perpetual cycle of declensions, conjugations, syntaxes, and prosodies, renewing constantly the occupations which had charmed their studious childhood, rehearsing continually the part of the past. Life must have slipped from them at last, like one day. So he says that these schoolmasters, when they approached the concept of learning and teaching, it was based on their memories of the time that they spent as schoolboys in school, so that whatever they had not been able to learn, they would ensure that it was communicated to the generations of students who were given into their care. And some of the things that he says they found confusing were declensions or conjugations or syntax or prosody, all aspects that were studied as part of the study of Latin and Greek. So those masters concentrated on the languages, these masters do not. They were always in their first garden, reaping harvests of their golden time, among their florae and their species legia, in Arcadia still but kings, the ferule of their sway not much harsher, but of like dignity with that mild scepter attributed to King Basilius. The Greek and Latin, their stately Pamela and their Philoclea, with the occasional dancery of some untoward tyro, serving for a refreshing interlude of a mopsa or a clown Demetus. So, lots of references, but if you go back to the previous lecture, I said don't get confused, don't get panicky when you are faced with a lot of names and a lot of terms and expressions from the Latin language. That's just Charles Lamb. He's just bringing in these words and phrases to make it more interesting, because what he's doing is he's making comparison of those schoolmasters with these schoolmasters. So when he talks about those schoolmasters, he says that all their knowledge, all their learning was in the field of language. It is through language that they studied philosophy. It is through language that they studied literature and the arts. So those schoolmasters were well versed in languages. These schoolmasters, the kind of schoolmaster who has just left him, they're more interested in the sciences. They're not concerned with the arts. So he says that those schoolmasters approach learning and teaching with the same energy, with the same ambition, that each year their enthusiasm, their energy did not wane. It's not like these schoolmasters who do not even wait for an answer, who put a question or who throw a statement in the air, and before the listener can respond, they disappear or they go on to another subject. With what a savour doth the preface to Collet's or Paul's accidents set forth, to exhort every man to the learning of grammar, that it intendeth, quite a tongue twister, to attain the understanding of the tongues, wherein is contained a great treasury of wisdom and knowledge. It would seem but vain and lost labour, for so much as it is known that nothing can surely be ended whose beginning is either feeble or faulty, and no building be perfect, whereas the foundation and the ground or the groundwork is ready to fall and unable to uphold the burden of the frame. Okay, quite a mouthful. Let us come back to this slide. And it says that those schoolmasters put all their faith in the knowledge of the language, as he says, the knowledge of the tongues, because in the study of language is contained everything: philosophy, literature, and these two branches of knowledge contain all other branches of knowledge. And the fact that those schoolmasters made sure that the base of the schoolboys was strong, that they knew everything that they had knowledge of. So it was a transference of knowledge. It wasn't an exchange of information. It was a transference of knowledge. Knowledge which increased the schoolboy's personality, developed his personality, but did not detract from the personality of the schoolmaster. So it was a transference of knowledge from the schoolmaster to the schoolboy, and it was done with the intention of making the foundation of a building really strong, so that the building, the structure, the frame could be supported, and the building was not too heavy for the foundation. In other words, the foundation had to be really strong. Those boys had to know everything that their schoolmasters knew. How well doth this stately preamble comparable to those which Milton commendeth as having been the usage to prefix to some solemn law, then first promulgated by Solon or Lycurgus, correspond with and illustrate that pious zeal for conformity expressed in a succeeding clause, which would fence about grammar rules with the severity of faith articles. So a lot of emphasis on language, because when you study language, when you study declensions, when you study parsing, you have to do it with the same amount of zeal and energy and enthusiasm as you would to the study of your faith. He calls them faith articles, the pillars on which rests your faith. That is how strong a focus and concentration you must bring to the study of language. As for the diversity of grammars, and then here he comes on to this prefix, it is well profitably taken away by the King Majesty's wisdom, who, foreseeing the inconvenience and favorably providing the remedy, caused one kind of grammar by sundry learned men to be diligently drawn, and so to be set out, only everywhere to be taught for the use of learners, and for the hurt in changing of schoolmasters. What a gusto in that which follows, wherein it is profitable that he can orderly decline his noun and his verb. His noun. What a way to treat a part of speech. The seriousness of purpose that is given to this portion tells you of the seriousness of purpose in teaching a language. Language is the be-all and end-all of all knowledge. It is only when you have learned how to parse, it is only when you have learned to put together a simple sentence in English that you can go on to other studies. So you need to be able to conjugate, to make sure that you're applying the correct declensions, and then only can you go on to other forms of learning. So the learning of the language is that strong foundation that those schoolmasters considered necessary in order for schoolboys to have a strong building constructed onto that foundation, which was provided by the study of the rules of grammar and language. The fine dream is fading away fast, and the least concern of a teacher in the present day is to inculcate grammar rules. So, a comparison of those schoolmasters with these schoolmasters. Schoolmasters in the past who emphasized a strong foundation in the form of learning the language with these schoolmasters, one of whom has just left him. The modern schoolmaster is expected to know a little of everything because his pupil is required not to be entirely ignorant of anything. He must be superficially, if I may say so, omniscient. He is to know something of pneumatics, of chemistry, of whatever is curious or proper to excite the attention of the youthful mind. An insight into mechanics is desirable with a touch of statistics, the quality of soils, etc. Botany, the constitution of his country, etc., etc., etc. You may get a notion of some part of his expected duties by consulting the famous tractate on education addressed to Mr. Hartlib. Now, he's making a comparison of those schoolmasters with these schoolmasters. Those schoolmasters focused on a thorough grounding in language. These schoolmasters are expected to be superficially omniscient in the sense that they must know chemistry, botany, mechanics, statistics. In fact, they must know a little of everything. But remember that old adage of being a jack of all trades? That is something that applies to Elia's definition and description of these schoolmasters as opposed to those schoolmasters. And he says you can get an idea of what is expected of schoolmasters if you look at this treatise that has been written on education and that puts forth the goals of education and how those goals are to be acquired. All these things, these are the desire of them. He is expected to instill, not by set lessons from professors, which he may charge in the bill, but at school intervals, as he walks the streets or saunters through green fields with his pupils. The least part of what is expected from him is to be done in school hours. Now he says the thing is that all of these things, that is knowledge of chemistry, zoology, botany, mechanics, etc., etc., he's supposed to instill in the students not during school hours, but during what is known as his free time. And this free time is also governed or is also regulated by his duties as schoolmasters. So this free time, he's taking a walk, he's also teaching. He goes to visit someone and he's teaching. So he never comes out of that teaching mode as contemporary educationists would call him. So the least part of what is expected from him is to be done in school hours. All of this is out of school hours. But even when school is over, his teaching does not stop. And there's a reason for that and a way of doing it. He must insinuate knowledge at the molia tempora fundi. He must seize every occasion, the season of the year, the time of the day, a passing cloud, a rainbow, a wagon of hay, a regiment of soldiers going by, to inculcate something useful. So it's not as if his teaching duties are very strictly prescribed. He's teaching at all times. He has to take occasion of every situation, no matter what happens, no matter what he sees, no matter where he goes. He is always in the teaching mode. So he has to think of the fact that he's teaching all the time. He's taking a walk, he sees a wagon of hay, he needs to teach about the seasons. He sees, let's say, a boy coming onto the road. He must find some aspect of teaching in that occasion. So he must not let any opportunity slip by without making that an occasion for teaching. He must interpret beauty into the picturesque. See how beautifully Lamb puts it. Beauty is something that can be felt, that is perceived. The picturesque makes it material. The picturesque focuses on certain aspects of beauty. The picturesque seeks to define and describe beauty. So what the schoolmaster is doing is defining and describing, explaining. He cannot feel, but he must translate those feelings, those thoughts, ideas into words. He must describe everything. He must be teaching all the time. He cannot appreciate anything anymore. So it's not only concerned with beauty. He cannot relish a beggar man or a gypsy for thinking of the suitable improvement. He can no longer feel, he can no longer think, but he must have everything taken from the point of view of instructions. If he sees a beggar, he must think of ways of improving the beggar's situation. You know, he can't feel anymore. He can't think anymore. Nothing comes to him not spoiled by the sophisticating medium of moral uses. So all the time you have the idea at the back of your mind that you have to use every situation, every object, every individual for purposes of instruction. The universe, that great book, as it has been called, is to him indeed, to all intents and purposes, a book out of which he is doomed to read tedious homilies to distasting schoolboys. The schoolboys don't want to learn what the schoolmasters want to teach, but the schoolmasters are forced to teach everything that they experience, everything that they perceive. So he cannot really perceive anything. He can't feel, experience anything, but he must be teaching all the time. Vacations themselves are none to him. He is only rather worse off than before, for commonly he has some intrusive upper boy fastened upon him at such times. Some cadet of a great family, some neglected lump of nobility or gentry, that he must drag after him to the play, to the panorama, to Mr. Bartley's orrery, to the panopticon, or into the country, to a friend's house, or to his favorite watering place. Wherever he goes, this uneasy shadow attends him. A boy is at his board and in his path, and in all his movements. He is boy-rid, sick of Perpetual Boy. So this schoolmaster, the kind of system that they have, is one of the upper class boys, maybe some relative of a nobleman, maybe someone who is a favorite, is attached to the schoolmaster, and henceforth it is the schoolmaster's duty to make sure that wherever he goes, whatever he does, this boy is with him. It's a very frustrating situation. Now, it's a very irritating situation, as Ilya points out, because he says that this schoolmaster does not have any vacation, because even during the so-called vacations, one of the boys would be perpetually attached to him. So if he's eating, the boy is eating with him, because he's supposed to be learning manners, etiquette, how to eat properly. If he goes for a walk, this boy will be tagging along behind him, with the idea that he's going to point out things of interest to him, how certain crops are sown, what times they are reaped and harvested, when do birds nest, how are cattle used, what purpose they are for, etc., etc. You know, he doesn't have a single moment of peace. He cannot enjoy going out into the countryside. He cannot enjoy a drink in isolation. He has virtually and practically no peace of mind, because this boy is always there like an appendage. So whether he is at home or at school, this boy will always be there with him. As he says, he is boy-rid, sick of perpetual boy. So that boy does not become a person, but for this schoolmaster it becomes a state. He is perpetual boy. Boys are capital fellows in their own way among their mates, but they are unwholesome companions for grown people. So boys, he says, and Ilya appreciates boys. He says, wonderful boys, but only when they are in the company of boys. In the company of grown-ups, adults, mature people, they become unwholesome companions, because there's bound to be a certain strain in the conversation of adults when they have a boy in the midst. There are certain things that they want to discuss, certain ideas that they want to explore with each other, but they are unable to do it because there is this third presence, this unwholesome companion in the form of a boy who is always there, who is listening, who has been told that he must learn from the schoolmaster. So the restraint is felt not on one side. The boy feels uncomfortable, the schoolmaster feels uncomfortable. It's a very uncomfortable situation. So even a child, that plaything for an hour, tires always. So it's a very tiresome and tiring situation to have a boy tagging along with you wherever you go and whatever you do. The noises of children playing their own fancies, as I now hearken to them by fits, sporting on the green before my window, while I am engaged in these grave speculations at my neat suburban retreat at Shackleville, by distance made more sweet, inexpressibly take from the labor of my task. So he says, I have nothing against children, I have nothing against boys. I enjoy looking at boys. When I am sitting at home in this retreat at Shackleville and I am trying to write or I am doing some other work, I look outside the window and I see these boys, these children playing, and I enjoy looking at them. I am amazed at how they manage to enjoy this time. But he says, there has to be a distance. I cannot be with those boys there in the field and enjoy myself. I have to be sitting at the window in my own home and looking out at those boys who are playing. So distance makes everything sweet. Distance makes everything beautiful. It is proximity that takes away from beauty, that takes away from enjoyment. So it is like writing to music. They seem to modulate my periods. So I look at the boys, they're playing in the field, I love them, I love looking out at them, but there has to be that distance between us. If they were in the same room, I would not enjoy their presence. I would not be able to create, I would not be able to write. So I should but spoil their sport. If they were in the room or if I were in the field, it would be equally tedious. I would not be able to enjoy my reading or my writing. They would not be able to enjoy their playing. So there has to be that distance to be maintained. I would not be domesticated all my days with a person of very superior capacity to my own, not if I know myself at all from any considerations of jealousy or self-comparison, for the occasional communication with such minds has constituted the fortune and felicity of my life, but the habit of too constant intercourse with spirits above you, instead of raising you, keeps you down. Too frequent doses of original thinking from others restrain what lesser portion of that faculty you may possess of your own. So, distance increases appreciation, mutual appreciation. The boys appreciate the schoolmasters or the grown-ups when they are at a distance. Grown-ups appreciate boys, as the example that Ilya gives is when he is sitting in his room and he looks out the window, he sees boys playing. It's a wonderful scene. He enjoys it, he appreciates it because there is that distance. So it's not just adults who do not like to have boys tagging along. The boys also do not want to be in too much adult company because their enthusiasm, their keenness is dampened by the conversation of adults. You get entangled in another's mind when you are too much in the company of another human being, and a human being who belongs to a different age group, a different social class. Then he says you get entangled in another man's mind because you're exposed to different ideas and different feelings all the time. There's a tendency to get confused. You're walking with a tall varlet whose strides outpace yours to lassitude. The constant operation of such potent agency would reduce me to imbecility. So if a schoolmaster and one who's getting on in years is accompanied by a young boy who walks fast, how is the schoolmaster going to feel? He's definitely going to feel at a disadvantage, because here's this young man who walks fast, so he can outdistance the master. That will definitely make the schoolmaster feel at a disadvantage. Okay, so he says it would make me feel like an imbecile, it would make me feel like an idiot who cannot keep up with the pace of the young boy. You may derive thoughts from others. Your way of thinking, the mold in which your thoughts are cast, must be your own. So even if you're borrowing ideas, the mold, the mind must be your own. And this can only be possible when there is distance between the mold and the ideas. There must be a chance to develop your ideas, and that is not possible when you are in such close proximity. Intellect may be imparted, but not each man's intellectual frame. So the ideas you can borrow. The mold must be your own. Your mind must be your own. As little as I should wish to be always thus dragged upwards, as little is it desirable to be stunted downwards by your associates. The trumpet does not more stun you by its loudness than a whisper teases you by its provoking inaudibility. So, it's not just that you are tired of being dragged upwards. Being dragged downwards is as frustrating, as tiresome and tiring as being dragged upwards. So if there is something that I am not able to do as well as this young boy, then I'm being dragged upwards. But there are also things that I can do better than the boy, and I don't want to be dragged downwards. So being dragged upwards is as frustrating, as irritating as being dragged downwards. So if this young boy walks fast, goes ahead of me, it's going to be as tiring and as frustrating as when I am making a conversation with somebody of my own age group, someone of my own intellectual abilities, and the boy keeps on asking questions. What do you mean by that? How can you say that? It's going to be as frustrating, as tiring as being dragged upwards. So the trumpet does not more stun you by its loudness than a whisper teases you by its provoking inaudibility. So what he's saying here is that it's not only being made to look upwards, being made to achieve something great that frustrates you, as it is when you have to lower your level. Why are we never quite at our ease in the presence of a schoolmaster? And there he's brought in a very important question. Why are we never at our ease? Now we are talking across a distance. So I know you are there, you know I'm here, but there is a distance. And this distance is because we are never at our ease in the presence of a schoolmaster. There's always that sort of a consciousness, that realization that we need to be doing something more, something better than what we are doing currently. He is awkward and out of place in the society of his equals. He comes like Gulliver from among his little people, and he cannot fit the stature of his understanding to yours. He cannot meet you on the square. How many of you know the story of Gulliver's voyage to Lilliput? Yes, it has been presented in many different ways. You have cartoons based on it. You have stories that have been made up in Urdu and which show you basically what the story of Gulliver is. So Gulliver is this giant, and the Lilliputians are tiny people. So when you talk about a schoolmaster and students, you have a Gulliver and you have the Lilliputians. So Gulliver feels as uncomfortable as the Lilliputians do. And there's no way that you can sort of have coordination. He cannot meet you on the square. You can't meet at the same level. Gulliver is 6 feet tall. The Lilliputians are 6 inches high. So how can a 6-footer meet a 6-inch high man at the same level? It can't be done. Teaching you. One of these professors, upon my complaining that these little sketches of mine were anything but methodical and that I was unable to make them otherwise, kindly offered to instruct me in the method by which young gentlemen in his seminary were taught to compose English themes. So Ilya says, you know, teachers are so used to teaching that they will teach even when you don't want to be taught. So I was having this discussion with one of the professors, and when I said, you know, I write whatever takes my fancy, and I write whenever I please, he offered to teach me how to write. Can you imagine anyone teaching Charles Lamb how to write an essay? It can't be done. And yet there are people who would do it because they are teachers, and they will teach you anything. They will even teach the taught. The jests of a schoolmaster are coarse or thin. So, you know, jokes of a schoolmaster being an adult would be different from the jokes that a boy would enjoy. They do not tell out of school. They're very restricted to the atmosphere of the school. He's under the restraint of a formal and didactic hypocrisy in company, as a clergyman is under a moral one. So a schoolmaster is hindered by the environment of the school, just as a clergyman is hindered by the fact that he is supposed to be guiding and leading other people. He can no more let his intellect loose in society. So he's got to be very careful of what he says and how he says it. He can't afford to take risks. I take blame to myself, said a sensible man of this profession, writing to a friend respecting a youth who had quitted his school abruptly, that your nephew was not more attached to me, but persons in my situation are more to be pitied than can well be imagined. We are surrounded by young and consequently ardently affectionate hearts, but we can never hope to share an atom of their affections. The relation of master and scholar forbids this. How pleasing this must be to you! How I envy your feelings, my friends will sometimes say to me, when they see young men whom I have educated return after some years' absence from school, their eyes shining with pleasure, while they shake hands with their old master, bringing a present of game to me or a toy to my wife, and thanking me in the warmest terms for my care of their education. So let's go back a bit. And Elia says, one of these sensible young schoolmasters wrote a letter to one of his pupils, uncles, and he says, you know, I'm sorry, but I feel I have failed your nephew, because I could not make him do what you wanted me to. And the reason for that is that he is not the only one. I am surrounded by schoolboys, and each one of them desires and needs my attention full time. So I cannot single out time for any one individual. And Ilya goes on to say that the relationship of a master and a student or scholar is sacrosanct. It's not a relationship that can be violating. It's very pleasing to have this feeling that you are looked up to, that you are admired, that your students are in awe of you. But you need to remember one thing, and that is all that respect, admiration cannot equal an iota of love that is shared by other people, by people outside this relationship of master and scholar. Because in this relationship there can be no love, there can be admiration, there can be respect, but love doesn't enter into it. And that is something that Ilya feels very strongly about. So he says, I feel this admiration, this respect, as long as they are students. Once they reach man's estate, once they go away from school, if they happen to come back, all that respect and reverence is gone, because then you're meeting as equals, as counterparts. Then there's no difference between you. So when schoolboys come back, they feel great because they are taking a present for their schoolmaster or for the schoolmaster's wife. But the schoolmaster feels that something has gone out of that relationship, and that something is the respect and reverence that is due to a schoolmaster. A holiday is begged for the boys. The house is a scene of happiness. I only am sad at heart. This fine-spirited and warm-hearted youth, who fancies he repays his master with gratitude for the care of his boyish years, this young man, in the 8 long years I've watched over him with a parent's anxiety, never could repay me with one look of genuine feeling. So schoolmasters do a lot for boys, they do a lot for students. Anything that the boys or the students want, they go to the master, and the master tries his best, his better than the best, to get that for his boys. So 8 years they spend with this master. And what happens after that? It takes a year, 6 months, 2 years to bring that boy at par with the master, where the master is no longer in control of that situation. And what Ilya feels most strongly about is that this boy will express his admiration, will express his appreciation, but he will not give one look of affection to his master. He was proud when I praised, he was submissive when I reproved him, but he did never love me. And what he now mistakes for gratitude and kindness for me is but the pleasant sensation which all persons feel at revisiting the scene of their boyish hopes and fears, and the seeing on equal terms the man they were accustomed to look up to with reverence. So it says, from the boy's point of view, it's wonderful. You have to look at it from the master's point of view. And from the master's point of view, there can be only regret. Regret that the boy is no longer in a situation where he could give one look of affection and love at the schoolmaster. The boy feels proud when he comes back to his alma mater, to his school, to his schoolmaster, because the boy can now treat the schoolmaster as his equal. They are now on the same plane. No longer does he have to look up to the schoolmaster. So from the boy's point of view, it is there is a feeling of fulfillment. From the schoolmaster's point of view, there's a feeling of frustration. And it's not just for the schoolmaster, it's for the schoolmaster's wife also. Because the schoolmaster's wife is as much responsible for the upbringing of these boys as the schoolmaster himself. So this interesting correspondent goes on to say, my once darling Anna is the wife of a schoolmaster. Again, Elia, and therefore Lamb, is going off into wishful thinking. Lamb never got married, but that does not mean that he cannot write about a hypothetical schoolmaster who was married and who enjoyed marital bliss. When I married her, knowing that the wife of a schoolmaster ought to be a busy, notable creature, and fearing that my gentle Anna would ill supply the loss of my dear bustling mother, just then dead, who never sat still, was in every part of the house in a moment, and whom I was obligated sometimes to threaten to fasten down in a chair to save her from fatiguing herself to death, I expressed my fears that I was bringing her into a way of life unsuitable to her, and she who loved me tenderly promised for my sake to exert herself to perform the duties of her new situation. She promised, and she has kept her word. So it's not just the schoolmaster, but the schoolmaster's wife also, who has to work for these boys. And here Elia digresses a little, and he says that my wife, before she married me, was not accustomed to dealing with these young boys, and I was rather afraid and apprehensive of what would happen when Anna married me. But she assured me that she would try her best, and better than her best, to fulfill the role of the schoolmaster's wife. And Lamb goes on to say that in spite of the fact that I had felt that no one could take my mother's place, Anna has done that, and Anna has become a schoolmaster's wife to the extent that she knows whatever is required of her, and she more than fulfills her duties. What wonders will not woman's love perform? My house is managed with a propriety and decorum unknown in other schools. My boys are well fed, look healthy, and have every proper accommodation, and all this performed with a careful economy that never descends to meanness. But I have lost my gentle, helpless Anna. When we sit down to enjoy an hour of repose after the fatigue of the day, I am compelled to listen to what have been her useful employments through the day, and what she proposes to do on the morrow. So Elia, the schoolmaster, has a wonderful wife, a wife who takes on her duties with a lot of enthusiasm, and who fulfills her duties to such an extent that Elia now says, I have lost my gentle Anna, because Anna has transformed into the schoolmaster's wife. She has transformed into a woman who takes care of the boys, who maintains a very welcome house where the boys can have their meals, where everything is clean, where nothing is wanting. And all this she manages to do with economy. She doesn't spend extravagantly. So all in all, she's the ideal schoolmaster's wife. But the thought that comes to Elia's mind is, where is the woman I married? That delicate Anna is no more there. She is my wife, but she is not the woman I married. She has transformed into this bustling schoolmaster's wife who takes care of everything, who manages everything, and whose entire conversation now revolves around what she did during the day to facilitate the boys and what she plans for the next day and for boys who will come to her to seek for advice and help. Her heart and her features are changed by the duties of her situation. So she's not the beloved anymore. She's the schoolmaster's wife. To the boys, she never appears other than the master's wife. So to the boys, she's the master's wife. But for the master, she is no longer the Anna that he wanted to marry and that he married. So he is in a peculiar situation. And as he says, my gratitude forbids me to hint to her the fact that I want my old Anna back, because she's done it only for my sake and above and beyond everything that I had expected. So I cannot reprove her and say, why are you doing this? Why are you not the Anna that I married? And he has been reduced to saying that Anna has taken over the boys totally because she's the master's wife. So things that perhaps he wanted the boys to come to him for have gone to Anna, because she has taken charge of the situation completely. And now Elia feels that he is being neglected. Although everything that Anna has done and is doing is for her husband's sake, that same husband feels neglected because she's taking care of so many things, she's looking after so many boys, that he can't say that he feels neglected. So before we end today's lecture and this essay, let me quickly go over some of the points that we mentioned here today in this essay that is titled The Old and the New Schoolmaster. This essay was discussed in 2 lectures, and in this lecture what I focused on was how the schoolmasters of today have to know about everything. They have to be to have a kind of superficial knowledge of every subject, because that is what the system of education expects of these schoolmasters. And then Lamb goes on into a detailed description of the system of education whereby schoolmasters would very frequently have some boy attached with them for further training, for greater access to the teacher's ideas and thoughts. And Lamb, in the form of Elia, says that it's a very difficult life to live, because the schoolmaster, having this boy attached to him, can no longer think for himself, can no longer feel for himself, but he must translate everything into knowledge. He must translate everything into instruction, even to the extent that his household is affected. The woman that he married because he loved her. But when he proposed to her, he was afraid that he would not be able to give her as much time and attention as other men would be able to do it, because she would be coming as the schoolmaster's wife. And Lamb ends on a note of slight a slight sorrow, a slight nostalgia for things that might have been, because he says, now Anna has taken over my household so completely that I have started to miss the woman I married, because she has become a wife now, and she's taken over all the duties of the schoolmaster's wife. She does everything for the boys. She facilitates the boys as far as it is possible for anyone to do so. But what I miss is the gentle, delicate woman I loved. So there is that feeling of nostalgia, particularly towards the end of the play, and this essay that he has presented with so much irony, so much humor in the beginning, and which ends on a sad note, on a note of nostalgia for what might have been. So thank you very much for your attention, dear students. Allah Hafiz.